Okay? Alright, now if there's no question, let's continue the opposite transaction. This time we are talking about central bank wants to sell the bonds. Remember, central bank can be the buyer, but they can also the seller. So here I'm talking about central bank as a seller. And macroeconomic background for that kind of situation is when the economy is growing too fast. So in other words, this is really like a booming economy, and Bank Indonesia is worried that the booming economy will lead to inflation and so on. So Bank Indonesia wants to reduce the money supply. One way to do that is by what? By selling the bonds. So this is the case of that. By selling the bonds. Okay. By the way, for those who really want to know exactly who are the players in the transaction here, basically primary bond dealer. There are only groups, so not just anybody can do that. You have to have a certificate to become a primary bond dealer. So the central bank, basically Bank Indonesia, will pay to the primary bond dealer. Let's assume the amount is 1,000 rupiah. And only after that, the primary bond dealers pay the 1,000 rupiah. Because the value of the bond is 1,000, so primary bond dealer have to pay the money to the central bank 1,000 rupiah. The question is, where do the primary bond dealers get the money from? From Bank 1, of course. Because here we are assuming the bonds is issued by Bank 1. Okay? And that bond is bought by the central bank. So Bank 1 will put the money, give the money to the primary bond dealer, and then primary bond dealers give the money 1,000. The question is, where does Bank 1 get the money from? Well, some are from deposit, some are from the reserve. Remember, every bank has money in the central bank. So this is the reserve, and this is from whatever the money that the bank has from the deposit. Okay? So that's if you're interested with how actually the transaction is going on here. But here in this class, we are more looking at the impact on the price and the yield of the bonds, because we are more interested with the connection with the macroeconomics here. All right, now, in the case of bonds,
sir,
there
I
are
have a question.
Yes, sure.
The reserve is the percentage of money that can't be loaned outright.
Correct.
But it can be used to buy bonds and government bonds.
Yeah, it can if, for example, there are some conditions. Okay, let me explain why there is reserve requirement. In almost all countries, there's a reserve requirement. You have to understand the way bank operates, okay? If I have a bank, let's say you are my client, you put your money in me, let's say 100. And then there are 10 other people put their money in me, also 100. So in total, there are 10 times 100. So I have 1,000 in my hand, okay? But sometimes there are some borrowers, right? Who comes to me as a client, wants to borrow money, okay? So I can use that 1,000, correct? Let's say I'm lending 900. Okay, after I put 100 in the central bank, I can lend 900, right? But after I lend 900, all of a sudden you, as one of the 10 person who put money in me, all of a sudden you come to me and I said, hey, I need the money, I need to withdraw my money. Where do I get the money from? That is the purpose of that reserve requirement. So the purpose of reserve requirement is that if bank during the transaction, they run out of cash, and yet the customer or the clients need the cash on that very day. Then they can get the money back from the central bank, because that's exactly the purpose of the reserve requirement. Okay? Now, that is one example. That is one normal example. But there are also other examples in which, suppose the economies really need the money, and that's why the central bank need to withdraw the money, okay, and buying the bonds from bank number one here, okay, and bank number one wants to buy that through the dealer, but they need the money. They only have 900, and yet the price of the bond is 1,000. That they can also get the money by telling or convincing the central bank, I need this money in order for me to survive. And for me to survive is I need that bonds. But I need that money, that 100 in addition to 900, so that I'll be able to buy the bonds. Is that clear?
Yes, it's
So,
clear.
so the point here is that the purpose of the reserve requirement, you know the meaning of the word reserve, right? Reserve is still your money, but you can use it only under abnormal situation, when you really badly need it. Under normal circumstances, you don't use that money. That's why they call it reserve, right? So that is the purpose of the reserve money. Okay. All right, let's continue here. So I was saying that there are two types of interest rate that bonds market has to be concerned with. Okay. First is the short-term interest rate. The second is not the long-term interest rate, but the short-term interest rate in the long run. So you have to underline this. This is extremely important because in the past, many students made a mistake here. They always think about, oh, we need to distinguish between short-term interest rate and long-term interest rate. No, it's not. What is important for the bonds market is what is the short-term interest rate and the short-term interest rate in the future. So there are two types of short-term interest rate. Short-term interest rate now and short-term interest rate in the future. So what is future? Well, it can be 5 years, it can be 10 years, depending on the maturity of the bonds. So let's say in Indonesia, we are talking about 10 years bond, because as I said, most popular government bonds in Indonesia is the 10 years maturity, right? So what matters is that what is the interest rate in Indonesia now, the yield of the bonds now, and then what is the bond yield short term, okay, so 1 year bond yield, but not now, but 10 years from now. Do you understand my point here? So let me repeat, what matters for the bond market is not the short-term and long-term interest rate, but the short-term interest rate now and the short-term interest rate in the future. Why this is important? Because in the bonds market, what market players always look at is what they call the yield curve.